This conference will now be recorded.
And we're just about at the top of the hour, so we're going to give everybody one more minute before I start.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Hello, Karen. Hello, Jamie, Jason, Suzanne. I was just saying this morning that or the other day, that I might switch this to a different platform so people can be incognito if they want to. I don't know if you have that ability. So, hey, Kenny, I see you in the background. You look like you've been outside.
Laundry today. It's a little cold outside.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
You must not be teaching if you're here.
Actually, I have meetings that started at 10 today. I taught the night before last night. So.
Oh, okay.
Not today.
I'm glad you can make it. Hey, Sandy.
Hey.
You might have to show us the view of Pikes Peak from that window. I think that's the window next to you is the one that faces the peak, right?
Yeah, let me go over there. You can see it. You should have seen the sunrise this morning. It was beautiful.
Oh, I bet. I bet. Well, good morning, everybody. It is the top of the hour, 9 o'clock. Welcome to 2022. For those who don't know me, Todd Smith, the owner of Level 5 Financial. This is what has, in 2021, was our kind of coffee chat. We did some happy hours. We've now renamed this to Ask an Advisor. I think that's a little bit more telling to what this format is. So I couldn't see the peak, Sandy. Sorry, I was starting to talk when.
No, the sun was blocking it.
So welcome to Ask an Advisor. I think it's a little bit more telling to what this format is. This is not, for those of you who've never been here before, this particular format is really just a channel for people to drop in, ask questions. If you don't have questions, be what I call the proverbial fly in the wall and learn from other people's questions. If there aren't questions, it's nothing I'm going to force, and we'll just drop off and get on with our day. I typically have some questions that other folks sent to me that couldn't make it, or have come up recently in just conversations day to day. So welcome. And feel free to jump in with any questions you may have. You can also put it in the chat box if you're a little shy. But it's a pretty laid back kind of format here. It's not, like I said, a formal webinar or education or anything like that. So typically I'm here, as you can see Tracy here, and I usually have another advisor or two if they show up. So we're just here as a team to support you in any way that we can. So welcome. It's hard to believe it's already mid-January. Where is the time going, right? But let's kick this off. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts that they want to bring up to begin with?
Just before we get into the questions, Todd's wondering if you can hear me, if I'm connected back in. I couldn't hear you originally, so I dropped back out and wanted to make sure I was back in okay.
I can, Jamie. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Sunny California. So, hey, Jason. You're muted if you're trying to talk, but I can see you talking there, Jason, just so you know. So we have Utah, we have Florida, and it looks like everybody else is probably Colorado. So we have a couple states represented. So that's good. Jamie, I'll be in Florida again next month, but I'll be up north. So one of these times I'll make it down closer to you so we can visit. So anyway, does anybody have any questions? Any pressing questions or thoughts for the new year? Don't make me choose somebody to speak. What do you do, Karen? So Karen's can I say this, Karen, that you're a professor and you teach? What do you do when your participants don't participate, I guess? Participants participate, or students. Do you call on them? Do you ask prodding questions? What do you do?
Oh, I do different things. Usually I tell them I'm going to demonstrate wait time, which I don't know if it's funny to you guys, but it is funny to them because it's a teaching thing.
So how do you do that?
I just wait for him.
So awkward silence.
Little
Awkward.
social pressure and people get uncomfortable and somebody will talk, but yeah, no, usually it just, this is weird because it's not a group that's always together, right? That makes it a little less comfortable probably.
Okay, well, that's good. I don't think I'll put people through that, but I'll take that under consideration. The awkward silence might not go over too well.
It's amazing how quickly somebody will speak because people do not like it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I have some questions and some topics I think we can talk about today. I'll remind you at the end, but we have another event next week on Thursday, a week from today at 4:00 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We have the agent in charge coming from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to talk about cybersecurity and all things fraud. So I think it should be very interesting and informative. It's one of those topics that is always timely. It never seems to change. We see things in the media. So that format is more educational. It should be about 45 minutes to an hour. I think we'll have Q&A at the end. So hopefully you can join then. I will also record that just like this. So I try to push these recordings out either on YouTube or in an email for people that missed the question or want to watch it separately. So tune in for that. Also, I just want to give you a heads up that we have letters going out here in the near future. If you remember, every year, for those of you that are clients of ours, we send out a beneficiary letter. So that beneficiary letter is important just to make sure that all your beneficiary designations are correct for the accounts that we manage, as well as all accounts, insurance policies, et cetera. So it's just it's a habitual thing we send out every year just as a reminder. It's one of those things we don't think about until it's too late, frankly. And that's really the common theme in estate planning. So we will also be reminding you that if you haven't done your estate planning or you need help with estate planning, that's something that we can facilitate. We'll need to set another meeting for that. So beginning of the year is kind of getting our affairs in order. So as your kind of advocate and coach, we're kind of pushing things out kind of in that realm. We'll also be sending out an IRA letter for those of you that are looking for shelters before tax season. You're getting all your tax documents, so you'll be seeing your accountant soon. Don't forget that you can still make an IRA contribution should you wish to get another deduction or shelter some money all the way up to tax filing deadline, so it doesn't have to be before 12/31 of the previous year. So you have until April. Actually, you have till April plus extensions if you do extend. So a letter will be going out for that. So just a heads up there. So estate planning, you know, again, it's a habitual thing. I'm always going to recommend we talk about it during our one-on-one meetings, but also it's a call to action for our organization as one of our themes each quarter or each year, I should say. So one of the questions that came up recently was about a living will. Does everybody know what a living will is? Yeah, okay. Does everybody have a living will pretty much? Yeah, okay. No? Okay. So if you don't have a living will, you probably should. So the main estate planning documents typically are your will, your power of attorney for medical, your power of attorney for financial decision making, and then you have the living will or your advanced directives. They're kind of called two different things, and that's really expressing your wishes should something happen to you. Okay, so I invited them today, but I don't think they're going to be able to make it. Maybe they have, and they probably wouldn't mind me sharing, but I do have a client that is having some medical issues. And that was one of their questions. She realized that the advanced directives or living will that they executed several years ago did not really suit what the circumstances. So this particular person needed a feeding tube, but in the advanced directives or the living will, that's where you designate, I do not want to be given nutrition, or I don't want to be resuscitated. Well, they had indicated that he did not want to be given artificial, nutrition. So you can imagine he was in the hospital, and in order to come home, he had to have a feeding tube. And she got out her estate planning documents, and it was pretty clear. So she called me and said, Todd, what do I do? Can I just cross this out and re-elect this? And I said, unfortunately, you can't. But also, I'm not an attorney. So let me tell everybody that I'm not an attorney, right? I can't give you legal advice. We don't draft documents. But the reality is, when you have something in an executed document like that, you'll have to redraft it. You'll have to void any previous documents and have it redrafted. So if you wanted to make a change on something like that, you can't just cross it out and initial it. So you typically have to go back to your attorney. But the important part of this particular case was that, or situation, I should say, was that the client was fully conscious and fully aware and fully capable of making medical decisions on his own behalf. So what was confusing, I think, to them is that the advance directive and the medical power of attorney really doesn't go into effect until at which point he could not make those decisions on his own. So all he had to say was tell his medical providers, yes, I want the feeding tube. This is the medical care I want. So that doesn't really go into effect unless he was highly medicated, which is a possibility, or he's unconscious, and that power of attorney or medical power of attorney springs into effect. Because what happens is that power of attorney springs into effect. In this case, the wife would be making the medical decisions, and then she uses the advance directive or living will as a guide to make those decisions. Here were his wishes. And it's a hard thing, but that's the job of the power of attorney, to really follow the wishes that was outlined in that living will. Does that make sense, everybody?
It does, but I have a question, Todd, just because of something a friend told me recently. So that's a guide for them, but they're not legally bound to do what it says in there. Is that true?
They do have a responsibility to follow it. And if the medical community has a copy of it, they pretty much are, as far as I know.
Okay, that's interesting because my friend said the doctor basically said, you don't have to follow this and we don't think you should right now. And they didn't.
Really?
So maybe that's the difference between in theory and in practice in that particular case.
It could be. Was it here in Colorado or was it in Utah?
It was in Colorado. Yeah.
Well, I don't know for sure. Like I said, I'm not an attorney. I'll check on that because I'd like to know too. But I talked to the attorney for my clients about this situation, and he seemed to think it was pretty binding. But who's to say? I mean, the client in this case was talking about not just saying I don't have a living will. I don't know where it is. So then that becomes moot. Like, who's going to prove that, right? So I suppose it could go to court. What's that?
It's just a hard thing. I mean, the daughter in this case was like, what am I supposed to do? I mean, it put her in probably an even more uncomfortable situation when the doctor said, you don't need to follow this.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll double check on that, but my understanding is it's pretty binding because what's the point of having it?
Right, yeah.
And I know my sister husband wouldn't go through with my sister's wishes in the will. And so she ended up having to go. I mean, they're in love. They're married for a long time, but he refused to go with her wishes. So she had to go through another person. So you really have to kind of almost like corner that person and say, this is truly what I wish. And maybe even record it on a video and store it somewhere or something. I don't know. That's what I did. I told my beneficiary that exactly what I wanted and how I wanted it, and recorded it on a video, and then we got it stored on both of our files.
Yeah, you actually brought this up last spring, I think, Jason. You asked this question in one of these sessions. Yeah.
I got all that taken care of this year, or last year, I guess now.
Yeah.
And it was a stressful situation, but it was good. I felt really good when I was done, but
Right.
it was, you know, something you just don't think about. There was a lot of questions like, oh, I don't know, you know, let me think about it.
Yeah. I quoted you actually maybe a month or so ago in a meeting, and I said, I had a friend and client say, I didn't know there were so many different ways to die, right? You would tell me that after you met with the attorney, you were overwhelmed with like all the potential scenarios, right?
Exactly. But I mean, it was good. It was something that I was, you know, I had anxiety about. But when I was done, it was like, okay, I feel good about this. I'm actually more comfortable about dying now than I was before because knowledge is, you know, was really good. I didn't know, and I had anxiety about what I did not know.
Yeah. I think it's a great point, Jason. It's worth mentioning that all things in life and financial, you know, when it becomes stressful when we don't know what we don't know, or we don't have our affairs in order. When we have them in order, we get that clarity and sense of control. It's less, you know, we're less anxious about it. So that's my job in a nutshell, is really coaching people to get the things done that they need to do. So I'm glad you did that. That's good. That's good. If we get, I think the statistics are still pretty dismal. I think like, I want to say, I can't remember, 70% of households don't have any estate planning documents or something like that. So that's why it's a call to action, you know, that I have every year, is to remind people, if it's not you, then it's your family or your friends or your colleagues. And that's why we partnered with a firm to make it easier for people and less expensive. So for people that don't go the traditional attorney route, we do have a solution that we can help people at least get it done, you know, because it's important. It's important. So, but that's good, Karen. I'm going to check on that. You have me curious what the real legality is. So I'm going to call an attorney or email him on that, because is this really binding, and how does that work? You know, so.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know. And I have to say, I'm going to say this because maybe it'll embarrass me into following through. I still have the packet that you sent us last year at this time sitting in my kitchen, but we're going to do it this time for sure.
Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. This is recorded, by the way, Karen. I have proof. No, that's great. That's great. I don't want to be a broken record, but it is important stuff. And you know, I've been in the business long enough. I don't want to be the advisor that gets that call that we never did it. You know, we never did what we said, Todd, and now we're faced with this circumstance. You know, so I don't want to see that for any of my clients and their families. It can be pretty ugly. So good. Any questions around estate planning at all? Any thoughts about that?
What is the limitations on a Roth IRA? Is that still, you know, for financial, the maxed out for adjusted gross? You know, you remember what that is?
It's 196.
196 for a single?
I think it went back up. I can pull it up for you while we're talking, but yeah.
And then you would take that.
I will send you the workflow. There's a checklist on that I will send you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That I think is probably a pretty good depiction of that. You have to have earned income, so be aware, for those that are getting passive income, it has to be considered earned income. I think you do, Jason, the way you have things structured, even though you're kind of retired. So just be aware of that.
Okay.
Does everybody understand the difference between Roth and a traditional IRA? Nobody wants to admit whether they do or not. I think most people probably do, but I'm going to mention it anyways. So a traditional, when we talked about making an IRA contribution before tax filing deadline, I said, well, you could get a deduction. There's limitations in terms of how much you can deduct each year and how much you can contribute to it based on whether you're covered by a 401k or retirement plan through work, et cetera. But money that goes into a traditional IRA is deductible in the current tax year. Any money, once that money goes into the account, the money grows tax deferred. So any earnings, interest, capital gains, et cetera, it's all deferred until you start taking distributions on the back end. So it gets a little goofy, like I mentioned, if you have one set of rules, if you don't have an employer-sponsored plan through a job, like a 401k or through your own business, you have one set of rules for that. If you're not covered, then you have another set of rules for that scenario. So something to keep in mind. Now, a Roth, on the other hand, is really just kind of a traditional IRA on its head. So money that goes into a Roth is not tax deductible in the current year. So you don't get to write that off on your taxes. Any growth inside of the account still is not taxed year to year, so you don't get a 1099 or anything like that. Once the money comes out, it's all tax-free. So that's a nice benefit. I like the Roths. They've been around since '97, but they're probably underutilized because most people kind of followed the mantra of deduct and defer, deduct and defer. You're earning a lot of money, deduct what you can each year and defer it to a later date. The problem is a lot of people are ending up in retirement with sizable amounts of money that is yet to be taxed. So we look at contributing to Roth type vehicles instead. And not only is that an income stream that's already been taxed and will be tax free at the back end, it's really good for heirs. So and the new rules for inheriting an IRA make it even a little bit more favorable for Roths. So maybe we'll just cover that real quickly here. But let me show you the checklist real quick. And I misspoke. I think it's let me show you this here, Jason. So there's thresholds for single. I was thinking married filing jointly. The thresholds went up and there's kind of a tier, but I will send you this, but I will show it to everybody now as a visual depiction of how you determine whether you can contribute to a Roth IRA or not. So everybody see that? Can you see that okay? Yeah.
Yep.
So I'll shoot this off to you, but you start here. Do you or your spouse have earned income? Yes. Did you make any through a traditional IRA? Yes or no. Then it asks your tax filing status. In your case, you're single. Then it looks at modified adjusted gross income. Essentially, it's your adjusted gross. I hear a vicious dog, or is that wind over there, Sandy? I don't know what that is. She is a lab. I can't imagine it's a vicious dog. So the phase outs, actually, if you're less than 129, you can make the full contribution. And then you have partial contributions up to 144.
Ready for breakfast tomorrow? Yeah.
So that's for single filers. For joint, there's different thresholds. For this, you can, it used to be 196. That was a number that stuck in my head. This was the threshold. You can make a full Roth IRA contribution. Up to here, it's a partial. And then over the 214, you can't make any IRA or Roth IRA contributions. And then on the right here, it talks about what the limit is. For those over age 50, you always have a catch-up contribution of $1,000 that you can make. Okay. Now it's worth saying that those of you or people out there that are self-employed or have self-employed income, you can always contribute to a Roth through your own company plan without any limits. So I will use an example. If you have a solo K, a lot of times we create a solo, what's called an individual or a solo 401k. It's very similar to a 403b or a 401k plan sponsored by big corporations. However, you can sponsor it for yourself. So for a lot of small business owners, typically that it's just one person or it's husband and wife, we'll establish a 401k plan for them. They can contribute as both an employee and an employer. Solo Ks can have a Roth component to it. So just like you can contribute on a pre-tax basis for both pre and post-tax or pre-tax and Roth, or I'm sorry, let me back up. just like you can contribute as an employer and an employee on a pre-tax basis, you can also do the employee portion as a Roth. So that is not a loophole necessarily, but that's a workaround for those that have self-employment income, because you're not subject to these income limits. So I like to point that out. The other kind of technique that maybe some of you heard about, if you're bumping against these income limits, but you want to put money into a Roth, you can do what is called a backdoor Roth strategy. Anybody hear that before? No. So a backdoor Roth. So say, let's just use this example over here, and my income is 150. I'm a single filer. Based on the rules, I'm ineligible to contribute to a Roth. The backdoor Roth, there's some nuances to it, of course, but essentially the backdoor Roth strategy is you instead of contributing to a Roth, because I can't, I contribute to a traditional IRA, the deductible type IRA, and then I immediately do what's called a Roth conversion. So I make the contribution to the traditional IRA, and then I immediately convert it to a Roth. Now, when you can do a Roth, what's called a Roth conversion, there's no income limits. So that is a loophole kind of way for people that want to get money into Roth, don't have maybe self-employment income, their income is too high. There is a way to still do that. So just be aware of that. Does that make sense? I explained that okay? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, Jason, so you're good? Any other?
Yeah, yeah. We'll talk later on a little more details on some of that stuff.
Yep, I'll send you this, and I'll send you stuff on conversions and things like that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll talk about personal items off the call for anybody that has something specific to them or their situation. So, okay, I think Frank just joined us.
About that.
What's that?
Can I ask a question about that? So if you're going to do one, you said you didn't have to do it by December 31st, but you have to do it before you file this year, right?
By the filing deadline, yeah, but you have till April 15th. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Now that's different. That's different if you're using a self-employed type account, but for on the individual type retirement accounts, yes, you always have until your tax filing deadline. Mm-hmm. Gets goofy with the employer plans. It depends on the contributions. So I don't know that I want to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm happy to answer that for any. But typically, any individual retirement type account you have until April 15th, or even the deadline, October if you extend. So, okay. So I will send you that. I will stop sharing my screen. All right, so we have about a half an hour. I thought there was two questions that came up recently that I would, I guess really one issue that I'm asked frequently, and then maybe we will talk about in general terms what issues we should be looking at just going into 2022 and kind of tax season in general, just as a conversation piece. So some of you have either asked or you actually have purchased an annuity, and the question is, does that fit into your financial plan? So I see that out in popular media. People ask me about it, and I just thought we would address that really quickly. Does everybody know what an annuity is on the call? Pretty much? Yeah, okay. So some of you heard me say this, that I was kind of anti-annuity for many, many years. And the reason was there's very good salespeople out there that get very nice commissions by selling them. And they run around with the proverbial hammer. That's their only tool that they have, and everything looks like a nail, right? So the expenses and the inherent conflict of interest, and because of that, a lot of the major insurance companies just have this sales force going out and pushing them. I saw a lot of people put in annuities that never should have been. So for many years, I was trying to get people out of annuities and save them, anywhere from 1.5% to 3% in expenses a year because they were just put in annuities incorrectly. But you've probably heard me make the joke that it's, saying all annuities are bad or like saying all pit bulls are bad dogs, right? That's not true. There's good annuities and there's bad annuities, and it depends on the circumstances, your particular circumstances, etc. So there's two broad camps of annuities. One is a variable annuity and one is more on the fixed annuity. The variable annuities I tend to tell people to stay away from. They're sold as a regular investment with stocks and bonds, but they have a tax wrapper and an insurance wrapper around them. In my experience, they're just expensive investment products, but they're really insurance, and people really don't need that insurance component. They're sold as, well, you have a bottom, you have downside protection with upside potential, but the numbers really don't work out, because when you peel back the layers, a lot of those variable annuities, you have the death benefit that is about 1.5% per year. You have some riders that might be another 0.5 point or 3/4 of a point, and then the underlying investments themselves, the mutual funds that they use, can be well north of 1%. So think about it this way: if the internal expense of an annuity is 3%, and you're making, even in a good market year, you're making 8, 9, 10%, you're taking a big haircut, and that takes its toll over many years. So that's a variable annuity. I usually shy away from that. The other type of annuity is the fixed annuity type, and the fixed annuity is, think of it as a step up from money markets and CDs. There aren't sub-accounts necessarily with investments. They're much more cost effective, but they're annuity where it's not pegged to the performance necessarily of any economic market. So those are ones I think people should consider, only in the realm of maybe the retirement space. Okay, so for those getting into, either you're approaching retirement or you're in retirement, I think there's two considerations. This is how I start the conversation anytime somebody talks to me, is one, there's the investment component, and then two, there's the longevity component. Okay, so in retirement, there's a host of risks that we try to reduce, and those are two of them: the investment risk. Sometimes it's what they call sequence of return risk, and then the other is that longevity risk. So as you know, if you think of back to 07, 08, kind of the worst case scenario, hopefully we don't see that again in any of our lifetime, but we may. Really any type of asset class other than cash was significantly down. It was kind of an economic meltdown. So there was really no place to have your money. But even in a more tempered kind of bear market, you can easily look at, in a well-diversified portfolio, double-digit negative returns. So if you're an investor, and most people are, you really can't diversify away from that economic risk, right? We're always going to go through cycles. So the only way to avoid that really is not to be an investor and sit on the sidelines. But we all know that the time that we figure out when to be an investor and when not to be is pretty much impossible. So something that's middle of the road is an asset class that really is not linked to that economic cycle. And an annuity fits into that from an investment standpoint, because it's really just a covenant or a contract between you and an insurance company. So whatever happens in the economic landscape, really doesn't affect a portion of money that you have in that annuity. So it minimizes the investment risk. If you think you have stocks, bonds, real estate, precious metals, whatever, it's just another asset class to add to the mix to give a little bit more buoyancy to your portfolio. So especially when you're in the spending mode, you're not experiencing a hugely depressed portfolio. You can imagine if people in the 90s that were invested incorrectly, or even 07, 08, they're invested incorrectly, they were down 40 or 50%. Could you imagine if you were retired and spending from a portfolio that was depressed 50%? So there's a place for that type of annuity just from an investment standpoint, I think, if it's the right company and it's cost effective and so forth. And then there's the longevity kind of risk that we see in retirement. And the longevity risk really is, am I going to run out of money? Am I going to outlive my money? So that's a big concern for a lot of people. And that it kind of ties into that, where what we see statistically over a huge data set, over a century of data, if you compare a portfolio with traditional asset classes and then you add a fixed type component similar to an annuity, apples to apples, in the same time frame over the same period, the longevity actually is increased by having that type of component. So for those where that's a concern, and that's really my concern, is making sure people don't run out of money, it can make sense from that vantage point. I mentioned sequence of return risk, that's part of it. So say you retire in 2022, we're overdue for a pullback, right? We haven't had a really bad market in a long period of time. You retire in 2022 and it's just bad luck. The economy goes into a tailspin, and now all your investments are down right at the time that you're turning on your distributions. You can imagine, hopefully it's not as drastic as a 40% drop, but even a depressed portfolio in your spending is going to affect that longevity possibly, right? That's different than if you start retirement and it's positive, you have a couple positive years and then there's a negative. That's what they call sequence of return risk. So we can't control that. However, if you carve out some in your emergency reserves or a fixed type bucket, it minimizes that risk a little bit and then enhances your eventual income stream over the course of your life. So I just want to address that. I have that question quite a bit. I won't say I still love annuities, but some of them make sense. And I'm a dog lover, so pit bulls aren't so bad. Any questions about that? Any questions, anybody? No?
If apples to apples, if you had the stocks through you and that paid dividends, of if you were concentrating most of your investments on a dividend versus concentrating the same amount into an annuity, what do you think would be the difference with that? In a down cycle, would a dividend pay out a little bit more, or would the annuity be a safer bet? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think dividends are going to pay better typically. It just depends where interest rates are, because annuity payments are based on the prevailing interest rates. So in a low interest rate environment, annuity is going to pay less than dividend paying stocks potentially. But dividends are only going to be paid based on the profitability of the company and what they declare, right? So it's not totally apples to apples, because there's no guarantee that the company is going to pay dividend and what that would be, where an annuity is contractually guaranteed by the insurance company. So it's a little hard. Furthermore, I typically don't recommend dividend stocks as an income stream in retirement. So if you look at the research, and I have decades of real life experience that shows us too, there's two spending approaches, and that's one of the incorrect things that a lot of retirees do, in my opinion. But there's finding yield, there's finding dividend to create an income stream, which you're kind of alluding to, Jason. And then there is what's called a total return income stream. Okay, so I'll compare the two. So dividend or yield is exactly what you're talking about. It could be a bond that's paying yield, right? That's giving you an income stream. It could be a stock that's paying dividends. So if you have a stock that's a 4% or 3% dividend yield, that's the income coming out to you. The problem with that is that it's not really keeping up with inflation. There's no inflationary hedge there. And what I see a lot of people end up doing is that they have, because they need more income to keep up with inflation or to give them the lifestyle they want, they become yield chasers, and they don't fully understand the underlying risk associated with that particular investment. So I can go find you a high yield bond paying 8% right now, but I don't think you'd want that because it'd be a junk bond that could default, right? So I can look at a new client or a prospective client's portfolio that's in retirement, and that's how they're doing it. I can guarantee they have no idea that the underlying, investment risk that they have. The yield looks okay. So that usually doesn't work particularly well. It doesn't work particularly well in a low interest rate environment where bonds really aren't yielding very much at this point, right? A total return, we can talk more about this too, Jason, at some point. But a total return approach really is using all components of return to satisfy the income you need and you want. So you're actually, if you look at any investment, you have three components of potential return. There'd be interest, dividends, and capital appreciation. And you're using a portion of all those to actually create an income stream that you need. And that is a much more sustainable way of providing income over a long period of time. And it also enables you not to risk chase, or yield chase, and you're minimizing risk from the investment standpoint at the same time. So we have always advocated the total return spending approach, where you're taking a little bit of both. What we're more concerned about is in that kind of conversation is not what is the yield, but what is a sustainable spending rate over a 20, 30-year period. Right. So if you're getting income, dividends, interest, capital appreciation on a number of different type of investments around the world, what is a sustainable rate of distribution that somebody could reasonably take year in and year out and never run out of money? So that's where our focus is in that retirement conversation. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
And I will just go one step further. Some of you will recall from our periodic meetings. We'll have one this spring coming up, so hopefully you all sign up. But you'll recall that I initiated or kind of showed you that guardrail piece last year. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Yeah, so the guardrail piece is really of a way, it's a scientific way of establishing that optimal distribution rate so that you don't run out of money, but you also don't pass on with a mattress stuffed full of cash, right? So it's trying to find that happy medium. And the scholarship really was interesting. Gosh, it's probably been 30 years now. It started at 4%, and it was the concept was you can spend 4% every year adjusted for inflation, and that will last 30 years with a high probability of success regardless of what happens in the markets. That's evolved a little bit to more of, instead of a static kind of distribution rate, of a more dynamic, where we're monitoring that and adjusting it every year, so that you avoid that, because 4% could be too conservative, and then you have retirees not really living the life that they want because they're not spending enough, right? So then you can ratchet it up by 5, maybe up to 5%, right? But then the annuity ties into that, because I've seen annuities with a yield at 5 or 6%, the income stream at 5, 6%, even in this market. So you kind of cobble all that together to kind of arrive at a more dynamic approach to spending, not yield. And then you revisit, kind of rinse and repeat every year, right? So when we hit that next economic cycle, you might have to adjust downward. In good years like 2021, most of us have had 20 plus rates of return. You would be able to spend maybe a little bit more, right? So that makes sense? Yeah. Okay. Ken, you should sit down, or you at a standing desk like me. I'm at my standing desk.
Yeah, you can sit.
I said, yeah, I'm on the move. I'm in and out. I got so.
You're a busy guy, I know. You getting on the bike? You getting on the?
I just took the fat bike out yesterday, and that's the next place I'm going after I do the laundry is to take that bike out again. It's going to be a beautiful day here today and snow tomorrow, I think.
Oh, you getting snow down there? I didn't know.
We're about to see this big, and we're really hoping for it.
Yeah, it's beautiful here today too. It felt spring-like, so it was nice. Well, good.
It has felt like spring.
What's that?
It has felt like spring.
Yeah, it's nice. So, okay. I think that's all I had. I had a couple other issues, but we're running out of time. But did anybody have any thoughts or questions before we go?
I mean, if nobody else does, I'd love to have your opinion again on the 529A plan versus, just setting up, say my grandson, I want to find out if a 529A plan is the right sequence, or would possibly a direct account on the stocks and bonds in 18 years from now, what would be the better payout, better options, if he doesn't go to school, or if he does go to school, college or whatever, how that would all work. Because I'm right in the middle of that right now, finding out what we're going to do. And I know somebody's probably going to be giving you a call, Todd, about that as well.
Yeah, happy to be a resource for your daughter or whoever, any family. And that I mention that to everybody. That's why we're here. My call this year for 2022 is how do we create better contribution. We want to contribute more to our clients and the community as a whole. So always happy to be a resource. But yeah, the answer, probably the quick answer, and you and I can spend a little bit more time on this, Jason, too, is probably both. The 529 plan and something else. So he's so young, right? How old is he now?
Just turned 1 year 2 days ago.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So who knows what the heck the little bugger will be doing in 18 years, right?
Well, he's me, so it scares me.
Right. So that's the problem. So from a tax and a wealth accumulation standpoint, 529s can be nice because of the tax benefits that it has, right? So you can put money into a 529 and you don't pay tax on it. It's kind of like a Roth, but for education, right? So money goes into it. You can get a state deduction, typically, to some degree. Utah is not much. I think it's like $50 or something. You get some $50 credit or something, so it's silly. I'm like, what kind of incentive is that? But anyway, so money that goes into it, you don't pay, it doesn't show up in your tax return, right? So any growth over time is tax free, just as long as the distributions eventually are used for qualified education costs, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very much a Roth. And what I mean, how that accelerates the accumulation, because that snowballs, right? You can roll all those earnings back in and reinvest them, and that snowballs without tax. So that grows much faster than typically just a regular investment account without that shelter, right? Okay. So if you compared the two side by side over that period of time, 529 is generally going to grow faster, right? All things similar. The problem is exactly what you mentioned. What if he does not go to school or not use it, or does not have a qualified educational expense. Now, I'd have to check with Utah. A lot of 529s now allow you to use them for like high school and other purposes. So we'd have to check the
Really?
Utah. Yeah. So that just changed. They didn't do it in Colorado. Colorado, I believe, still has to be used for higher education. But the Utah plan, I haven't looked at it in a while, Jason. Let me look. Let me notate that to look at.
It would possibly part of Arizona because that's where they live, but they may be moving to Michigan. So, I mean, I don't know is it based on what I would contribute or where they live?
No, you can contribute to any plan in the union. Doesn't matter where they live.
Okay. So it's based on law.
Yeah, so I used to, like, when I was living in Arizona and I had clients all over, I was recommending the New York plan at the time, just because it was sponsored by Vanguard. It was very low cost. The Utah plan at that time was a pretty good plan too. So you can choose any plan you want. If you're the donor, you want to typically do it in a state that obviously makes sense from an investment standpoint, expenses, et cetera, just what I mentioned, but also if I were doing it, I want to do it where I'm going to get the deduction. So I have a niece in Utah, and as you know, so I contribute to a 529 on her behalf, but it's in Colorado. I get a state tax deduction for that contribution. Doesn't matter where you live. Yeah.
Okay.
So so for you, I guess the short answer is you just want to do a comparison of which plan makes sense for you and then contribute.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I want what benefit for my grandson, more than me. But yes, it'd be nice to have benefit both, but I would lean much more towards his benefit in 18 years.
Yep. Yeah. So, two things about whether he goes to school or not. One would be, are there going to be other grandkids or other family members that could use the 529?
Yeah.
Because you can always change the beneficiary, as you know, right? So you start a 529, he's the beneficiary, and he goes to live in a van in Europe. You change the beneficiary to somebody else.
With a pit bull.
Right, exactly. Or you could go back to school. You could get your doctorate in woodworking, and you could use it, right? So that's one escape hatch, is just changing the beneficiary. And that's why I would typically not have multiple 529s for multiple grandkids or kids, because maybe just have one. The only other option really is then to either not fund a 529 altogether or split the difference. And that could be the proverbial carrot for him, like, hey, split the difference. You put some in an investment account and some in a 529, but hey, I kind of want you to at least get some college. Doesn't matter what you do with your life, but it's important, hypothetically, to you that he does that. That's the proverbial carrot of knowing that there's some money dedicated specifically for that.
Okay.
So there's no real science or black and white answer for it. It's all a personal decision. And like I said, it's kind of a crapshoot, how it's going to be used. But I would do some to a 529. They're pretty cost effective. That you get the tax benefits. Chances are somebody in the family could use it beyond him. So that's kind of my sense on it.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Seems like we had this conversation. That's probably what we talked about before. So I don't know if it's more helpful or not, but.
That was my contribution, or will be, for his 1-year birthday a couple days ago. That's what I wanted to do, and now we're down, within a week or so of truly getting this figured out. Yeah. So we're at a deadline now in my mind that I want to get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also say that there's an estate planning play in that too, just for people that are going to potentially have an estate tax issue. A 529 is an irrevocable gift, essentially, that you can take back. So it's one of the only irrevocable gifts you can actually take back. You have to pay penalties and the tax on it, but when you gift money to a 529, it removes it from your personal estate. The lifetime exclusion has been 11.5 million, right? So most people's estate aren't above that. But that could go away. That could be repealed. That could go back to where it was. It was $1 million at one point, or $5 million. So that's much more realistic, where people's estate are now going to exceed that. So if it exceeds that, then you now have an estate tax problem. So doing things like annual gifting, 529s, those are ways to keep your estate, you're still keeping it in the family, but you're keeping your estate below that threshold so that you don't have to pay Uncle Sam, And some people say, well, what do I care? It's Uncle, I'm dead, but it's still wealth preservation for the family, right? Like why waste it if you don't have to? So,
Yeah.
Yep. Good deal. Shoot Tracy a message if you want to get on my calendar anytime soon, Jason. Happy to talk. So
Well,
that's just the easiest way. So we're not playing phone tag and, are you available this day? No, I'm not. Either am I.
in-house meetings, you don't do in, you don't come to Utah? I'm quite miles from Zion National Park.
I do. I want to go to Hurricane. I heard it's pretty cool. Yes. Actually, I might be there in, no, I can't remember what month it is. I want to say September I might be there. So I'd love to. Yeah. Hey, it's a tax deduction, right? The whole trip would be a write-off, so I should.
Dang it.
Are you doing your summer trip back here, do you think, this year?
Oh yeah. I always do the San Juans. I do the big hike in San Juans. I'm going to try to do the wave in 2 weeks again. And also Antelope Canyon if it doesn't close down. But I just came from Vegas this morning, and Vegas is starting to shut down. Starbucks is shutting down. All of Starbucks in Vegas is going to be shutting down. Some of the Walmarts. I mean, it's kind of bad news there.
Yeah, where my sister lives in your state, I talked to her yesterday. My niece got COVID. She's 12. And she told me it was the 4th worst county in the whole country in Utah, in her county.
Oh.
It's just rampant. It's just rampant. So, yeah, I don't know. I went to my gym. I've been going to my gym here, and Colorado blows my mind. You wouldn't even think there's a pandemic going on. There's no masks. There's nothing. It's like, I don't know.
I just went to the Arizona Cardinals game the other day, and there was no mask required.
Yeah. So it's just
come to Florida, where AOC comes to visit from her draconian state.
right. All right, guys. Well, I have a client meeting coming up. I kind of have a hard stop here, but hey, I loved seeing you guys. It's always awesome to see you. Thanks for coming in. We're gonna do this every month. I'll do a better job having better questions in case you guys don't. Dial in next Thursday at 4 if you can. I think that should be cool to have an agent on board. So be safe out there. I appreciate you, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Todd.
All right,
Thanks, Todd. Bye, Tracy.
See you. Bye-bye.